Hi, I'm Diana. I'm 15 years old, and I love crows. Have you ever needed a friend's help? To borrow money, or to help with a test? Or to beat the offender? What if that friend was a crow? Watch this video to the end and find out what can repay the kindness of a smart bird. I have always wanted to have animals, but I was faced with the same problem, my dad. My dad is a unique person who combines 50% anger, 30% rage, 19% stubbornness, and just 1% sanity. That's my dad. Once, we had such a severe winter in our town that even people in fur coats were cold outside. But I had to get out because I remembered that I hadn't parked my bike in the garage. And next to it, I saw a crow. It was injured. There was something wrong with its wing, and it was limping. I thought that it would not survive in this weather, and I shivered. Oh, I could get into trouble for this. I grabbed the crow and, cursing under my breath, carried it into the house. Dad raged all night, but for once, I didn't listen to him. The crow would die if I threw it out, and I didn't want to kill animals. Have you ever stood up for your principles in the face of a man who could break you in half? Ugh, what a feeling. I suggested Dad to wait until spring, and in return, I would not let Quasi, as I called my foundling, out of the room. Dad didn't like the idea. He said he wouldn't wash bird droppings. But I, after all, was also very angry and stubborn, and I could insist on my own. During the winter, we became very friendly with Quasi, and I almost cried when I let her out into the woods. But I had to let her out because she was stronger and could fly safely, and Dad was getting more and more angry. How was I to know that she would not leave me? Quasi began to fly to our lawn, sometimes even with friends. Good thing it always happened during the day when Dad wasn't home. I was very afraid of his anger, and I taught Quasi to fly not to the lawn, but a little further away, to the trash next to the forest. Then, there I hung out with them, fed them, and occasionally did homework. It was great. I felt like a superhero, a girl mistress of the crows. And so, my 2 years passed. But one time, a complete mess happened. I went with my crows to the trash, and Ramona noticed me. She was a stupid and evil viper from a rich family. Everybody was trying to butter her up because otherwise she would ruin your whole life. She was with her henchmen and started pointing like, "LOL, look, she's a bum." What could I say? Have you ever defended your honor with fists? I lunged at Ramona, but her friends intercepted me and started pulling my hair. And then, this happened. Damn, this! A flock of crows gathered above us, and they began to attack the kids. I didn't even notice how many of them appeared. The birds attacked Ramona and her friends, but they didn't touch me. There was a scandal waiting for me at home. A good scandal. I told my mother everything, and instead of feeling sorry for me, she told my father. He arrived in the evening in a ferocious rage. During this time, the parents of Ramona and these guys called us and started complaining, saying, "Your girl beat up our children." Oh, and the evil and terrible Diana single-handedly beat up 2 guys and 3 girls. Who would believe that? Dad and Mom believed it. Most of all, they were angry that I continued to feed my crows and, as they thought, set them on their abusers. All I'd been listening to all night was that my next prank would end up in jail. What was I supposed to do? Obediently take the insults? But Dad wouldn't listen to me. He locked me in my room, took a rifle, and went to shoot the crows. I only heard 2 shots, but each of them wounded my heart. What if he had killed the Quasi? Why were they doing this to me? I hated them. The attacks on me at school only increased. I was called Queen of the Trash. And one of Ramona's assholes stuffed a crow's corpse into my backpack. I started running away from school in tears. And I really didn't want to go home, but I had to. My father organized a kind of house arrest. Well, so that my mother immediately picked me up from school and did not let me out on the street later. I was angry. They drove me crazy. Have you ever felt that the whole world is against you? That no one wants to understand you? I was crushed these days. But one day, I saw Quasi again on the lawn. We didn't see her again until the summer. Probably my smart girl realized that there was no one else at home and decided to beckon. She looked at me and jumped a little ahead. I left the house and followed her. Quasi led me to a house in the woods, and there I saw a bunch of crows and a boy my age, maybe a little older. Quasi sat on his shoulder and he asked what I was doing here. I told him about Quasi, and the boy was relieved and happy. He said that his name was Jamie, and that he was the owner of Quasi and the other crows. Jamie and I quickly found a common language. He fed them and trained them, just like me. And he was laughed at school too. It was great to find someone with similar problems. We started meeting, talking. He taught me how to train crows, and in general, he turned out to be a good friend. I almost believed that something good could come into my life. Alas, a couple of months later, my parents announced that we were moving to another city. And it was my fault, they said. I ruined our family's precious reputation. I shouted back that I would rather live in a dumpster and ran into the woods in tears. I met Jamie there. The news upset him as much as it did me. And he said he had a present for me then. I swallowed my tears and thought resentfully, when would he have given this gift if I hadn't turned out that we were going to break up? But all my skepticism went out of my head when he brought me a beautiful silver ring with a raven's head on it. He said that it was his mother's ring, that it had become too small for her, and that she'd allowed him to give it to the crow's friend, as she called me behind my back. I cried even more and promised him that I would never forget him without the ring. But I didn't refuse from it. For some reason, I felt I had to keep it. What would you do if your parents drastically changed your life without even asking for your permission? Parents are not classmates. You can't just go over and fight them. So they always take a high hand over their children. I let them move in, but I didn't let them get the crows and Jamie out of my heart. I was waiting for the call, for the letter, for anything. I spent days looking at the ring and thinking of my best friend and our crows. Nothing. Silence. A complete zero. But you know I'm not one to give up easily. A year later, I came to the city when I started my vacation. A school friend let me stay, and on the first day I told her, okay, I'll go to Jamie. To whom? She asked. To Jamie. What's the problem? Lucia hesitated for a long time, and finally told me the terrible thing, after which I fell into a chair. It turned out that Jamie died just a few months after I left. He climbed to the roof to fix it, and broke his neck in the fall. His mother left town because she couldn't live in a house that reminded her of her son. I was speechless. So that's why Jamie didn't write to me. I should have known that I should have come as soon as it happened. But how could I know? I cried all evening and all night, and the next morning, I rode my bike to Jamie's abandoned house. The crows were still nestling there, and I swear to you, they were happy to see me. The house barely appeared on the horizon, and they were already rushing toward me. They surrounded me and cawed loudly, as if asking where I'd been for so long. I looked at the ring, then at the sky, and realized that if a person's soul didn't go to heaven, then it had to become a bird. And maybe Jamie, my best friend, got lost among those crows. I went back to my new home, but I didn't forget my friends. I am determined to connect my life with the birds, in memory of Jamie. Recently, my mother apologized to me for all that time. I don't know what made her do it, but I told her about going on vacation, and for the first time, I was able to cry properly. And my dad? Well, I'm sure I took after him in my stubbornness. One day he will say, I'm sorry to me, but I don't think it'll be for a long time. Did you like the story? Then hug your pets, put a like, and other viewers will see it. And don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss our new videos.
Hi, I'm Tammy, and I'm 13 years old. Have you ever felt like you swallowed something alive? As if you have something inside you threatening your life? This story happened to me, and the feeling of it still haunts me. Watch this video to the end and find out what will happen to a person if they swallow a poisonous snake. My parents devoted their entire life to biology, so I was interested in exotic animals and insects since childhood. What ordinary children were afraid of were my favorite toys. And instead of bedtime stories, I like to listen to encyclopedias and scientific work of my mom and dad. I always wanted to have an exotic animal at home, but my parents were against it, saying that it could be dangerous and that they had enough of them at work. Until recently, my father was given a small and rare poisonous snake for his birthday. I was thrilled. Of course, I immediately wanted to play with it, but my dad stopped me. He placed the snake in the home terrarium and said that it should not be touched during the adaptation. And he forbade me to take it without permission because it was poisonous. I was upset, but still, I couldn't stand it, and my curiosity took over. Have you ever disobeyed your parents? The next day after my parents left for work, I snuck into my dad's office and played with the snake. I decided to name him Tony, so in secret, I continued to visit Tony every day. But over time, I got bored playing with it alone, and I wanted to show off the snake to my best friend Carl. I decided to prank him, and I really thought it would be fun, but my plan failed. We sat and played our favorite game. I told Carl I was going to get us something to eat, let Tony out of the terrarium, and carried it to my room without being seen. I thought Carl would get scared. We would laugh together and play with the snake. But the prank got out of control. When Carl saw the snake on his leg, he jumped up in horror, screamed loudly. His face turned completely white. He fell to the floor and he began to suffocate. Honestly, I didn't even know what to do, but it was necessary to act quickly. I found a brown bag in the kitchen, ran to Carl, and he started breathing into it, slowly coming to himself. I gave him a glass of water, he drank it, and started yelling at me. It turned out that he couldn't stand snakes, lizards, and all the alike. As a child, he was even allergic to them. He accused me of knowing about it and setting it up on purpose. But I had no idea that Carl had such a fear. We had a big fight. Carl took offense at me and slammed the door. I returned the snake to the terrarium before my parents noticed and went to my room. I was very sad that we had a fight because this has never happened in all of our friendship, so I had nightmares the next night. I was almost asleep, and in my sleep, I thought that something cold was lying on my stomach and beginning to crawl to my head. It crawled right into my mouth, and I couldn't even move. I woke up the next morning in a cold sweat. I was afraid, and what I saw and felt in the dream seemed very real. I was very scared and quickly ran to look at the terrarium, but it was empty. My legs began to shake, and I clutched my stomach and couldn't move. Was there a little snake inside me now? Just thinking about it made me feel sick, and I ran to the bathroom. Apparently, I didn't close the lid properly yesterday, and Tony just crawled out of the terrarium and into my mouth. Even in the morning, I felt something moving on my lips. It was just awful. I couldn't sleep, walk, or even eat. And it always seemed to me that there was a chill in my esophagus. Something alive. It was as if something cold-blooded had crawled all over it. More and more thoughts came into my head, and I couldn't handle them alone. So the next day at school, I found Carl, asked him for forgiveness, and told him what had happened to me. He was so shocked, as if he had quarreled with me. He started thinking about how to solve this problem. He was worried about me. It was nice, but it looked like he knew about it. I decided not to attach importance to his reaction. Carl told me to go to the doctor right away, started saying that it was very serious and we couldn't solve it ourselves. I burst into tears and said that I would never go to the doctor. I needed a friend's help. Are you afraid of doctors and hospitals? And then we remembered that Carl's mother was a biologist, and she had a very rare book on cold-blooded animals at home. Carl calmed me down, and we ran to his house right after school. We had to do everything before his mother arrived. We snuck into her office and started looking for the right book, and I was getting worse and worse and very sick to my stomach. Carl was worried because his mom's office was a restricted area in the house, and he was always rushing me. But I couldn't move any faster. I was constantly dizzy from fear. Unexpectedly for us, the handle of the front door turned. Carl's mom came home early, and she found us in her office. She started yelling at us, and especially at Carl, and even threatened house arrest. But I couldn't let that happen. So I gathered my thoughts and told her everything. She hesitated and seemed less angry, and I thought she calmed down a little too quickly. Maybe she was just worried about me. She said that most likely I need to be examined by a doctor because the snake could damage my esophagus or even poison me. And since the snake was poisonous, it could dissolve in the stomach and the poison would get directly into my blood. It only made me feel worse. I knew it was a lost cause. Everything went too far. I would have to tell my parents. Carl's mother quickly arranged an appointment, and half an hour later, we were on our way to the hospital. I felt worse every minute. I blamed myself for everything. I lost a friend, hid everything from my father, and violated his ban. She said that she would have to tell my parents, but I decided that I would tell them myself. Meanwhile, my stomach was turning. I really thought that the snake poison was already in my blood. I was constantly sick in the car, and I barely made it to the hospital. I was already sitting in line, looking pale and scared, when Carl's mother said that I would probably get a gastroscopy, and if necessary, they would perform emergency surgery. I sat in the corridor and was trembling with fear. I was supposed to be called in for a checkup any minute. And then I saw my parents. They looked very serious and even angry, so I couldn't stand it. I jumped out of my chair and excused myself to my mom and dad. The fear of the examination, the operation, and the whole situation overwhelmed me even more. I immediately told my parents everything. And when I finished and opened my eyes, I saw my dad smiling gently at me. At first, I didn't understand why, and he showed me a jar with a snake. I was shocked. Did I just dream it up and almost drive myself crazy? How could this happen? Suddenly, Dad took the snake out of the jar and held it out to me, and I immediately jumped back, afraid that it might bite me and inject poison. But my father showed me that the snake had no teeth. I didn't understand what was going on, and my parents admitted that I was just being pranked, almost as much as I had pranked Carl. My parents said they wanted me to learn this lesson and never disobey them again for my own safety. Yes, it's hard not to learn. It turned out that Carl had told them all about my joke. I asked where had the snake from the terrarium gone. It turned out that my dad just took it to his lab. I was so glad I hadn't swallowed the snake that I forgot my parents and Carl had taught me a valuable lesson. I was surprised that I didn't notice anything, but apparently my imagination did everything for me, and I couldn't think of anything but the snake. I knew it was all for my own good. I could have hurt Carl with my joke, and my stupidity and curiosity could play a trick on me. Now I avoid my father's office. I try not to stick my nose and hands into everything. And for this behavior, my parents promised to give me my own terrarium with a water snake. If you liked the video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel. Be careful with your imagination, and have a good day!